survivors, and we thought it was important and incumbent on us to tell our parents' story, not only to honor their lives, but to remember their stories of survival. And so some of you are probably thinking, why are we even doing this? It was such a long time ago, so far away, it's just history, and why is it even important? Why do your teachers feel that this is a topic that needs to be taught in the schools today for students all over, not only Vermont and the United States and the world? It's because we're trying to um, learn from our history. We know that this happened in Germany. It started in Germany. And Germany, we remember, was a country that was on the forefront of medicine and music and science and art. And it was much like a country that we live in today here in the United States. But it started in Germany, and it started because there was a leader who believed that the Aryan German northern race was a superior race, and felt that all other people were inferior. And most of all, he felt that the Jews were the worst of the worst and needed to be eliminated, exterminated, and had no reason to live anymore. And through words, excuse me, through a book that he wrote called Mein Kampf, through speeches, through rallies, um, through propaganda. I think you guys know that word, propaganda. By saying things over and over again that were not true, people started to believe it. They were in a bad way. They didn't have jobs. They were desperate, and someone came along with a reason to think that Germany could be great again. And this was what happened, and this is how it happened. And so it's so important that we learn from history what happened so that it should never, ever happen again. And that is the reason that your teachers find it so important to teach you the stories of the Holocaust. Ms. Norwood, if you would go to the next slide.
Yes, absolutely.
So my name is Miriam Rosenbloom. Deneboom is my maiden name. And I am the daughter of two Holocaust survivors. Both my parents survived the Holocaust. I was born in the Netherlands, Holland. It's two words that are the same country, Netherlands and Holland. And my family goes back in Holland some 400 years. So we were there a long, long time, and very much a part of the country, and very much, situated in Holland as a Jewish family. I am Jewish. So if we go to the next slide. Showing you this slide, I'm going to tell you the story of my father's survival, but this picture is a picture of my mother's family. On the left is my Aunt Esther, who was 12, my grandmother, then my Uncle Joe, then that's my mother in the black dress, and my grandfather. This picture was taken before the war, and it was actually taken before the war, but it was actually taken just before they all went into hiding. They were from a town called Zutphen. They were just an ordinary family. It was a family like yours and like mine is today. They were not bad people. They were good people. My grandfather owned a dry goods store. He had many customers. They were well liked in their village in Zutphen in Holland. But they took this picture together because they were all just about to go into hiding, and they didn't know if they were ever going to see each other again. Now, if you look at my Aunt Esther on the end there, she's 12 years old. I don't know how old you guys are. You're probably 13 or 14. She was 12 years old, and she was now going to go into hiding. I'll tell you that the good part of this story is that this family, my mother's family, all survived. Almost unheard of that a family was intact after the war. So this was a picture that many families did. They took a picture of a family together because they didn't know what was going to happen, where they were going to end up. But the nice part about this family, my mother's family, was they all survived. They were all in hiding in different parts of the country, didn't know where they all were, but all came together. So now I'm actually going to tell you the story of my father's survival, though. So if we go to the next slide, I give you a bit of background. My father grew up in this beautiful big home because my grandfather was the director of a home for children with learning disabilities. And this home was where they were housed. It was a boarding school. The children were between the ages of probably 8 and 20. They all had learning disabilities. They were all Jewish children. And in those days, if you had a learning disability, you couldn't go to a regular school. They didn't have classes for people who couldn't learn with the other children. So parents were very excited to be able to send their children here to this facility. My dad, it opened in 1925. So my father was 3 years old when he moved there with his two brothers and his mother and his father. And he lived there his whole life. My grandfather was the director. And this was a very a happy place for these children to be. There were about 69 children that lived in this home. If you go to the next slide, this is a picture of my grandfather, my grandmother, my two uncles, and my dad is the man, the little boy on the right holding a shovel in the sandbox. This is the only picture I have of my grandparents, actually. So he grew up there, and it was a very, you could see they were very dignified people there. And Hilversum, where this home was a beautiful town. It's not far from Amsterdam, lots and lots of trees, kind of like Vermont, big homes, very, very nice place. And so this is where my dad grew up in this home. So if you go to the next slide, these are just some pictures of the children that were in that home. It was a very happy place. Children learned secular subjects. They learned Jewish subjects as well. They celebrated birthdays and they had parties and dances. They taught the boys how to fix bicycles and do a little bit of woodworking. And the girls learned how to cook and to sew because the parents and the teachers wanted these children to grow up and, have maybe not a profession, but a value in society so that they could lead a normal life when they grew up. I should say that my mother was one of the workers in this home as well. So this is, you can see what a beautiful place this was. However, in 1940, the Nazis invaded Holland, the Netherlands. And at first, life was difficult, but not impossible. People's bicycles were taken away. People had restrictions with curfews. Jewish people couldn't associate with non-Jewish people. If you were professional, you couldn't go to a Jewish, say, doctor. If you were not Jewish, every day there was another decree passed against the Jewish people. And so life was difficult, but people felt, and I know my grandfather would say, if I just followed the rules, we're going to be okay. We're just going to do what we're told to do and everything will be okay, not knowing where this was all going to lead. But so time after time, there were other decrees passed against the people. So what happened in the Rudelsheim Stiftung, in this home for the children, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that in April of 1943, the Nazis came to this big, beautiful home with 16 trucks. They rolled up in front of the house. They took all the children, all their stuff, all the staff. There was about 10 staff members that worked there, and they moved them. This notice said the moving of the Rudelsheim Stichting. They've moved from this address now to the Monikaberg. It was another large home. It was actually a place where nuns were. I have visited that place. They moved them all to this new facility because they wanted this big, beautiful home for the Nazi headquarters for Holland, because it was such a fantastic home and they didn't care about the children. They just moved them all out. So they were there for 11 months in the new facility. But in March 1943, the Nazis came again to where the children were and the workers. They piled them all into trucks, all the children, all the workers, my grandparents, my uncles, and they took them away. Where was my father? Why wasn't he taken away? So the story is that my grandmother said, I don't know who that boy is. He doesn't belong to us. He's not part of the home. I don't know who he is. Get away, run away, go. And so that's what my father did. I have to say that people only survived the Holocaust because of luck. If you were rich, if you were poor, if you were, a professional, if you were a baker or a shoemaker, it didn't matter who you were. If you were Jewish, you were a target. So this was just one thing that happened for my dad. My grandmother basically disowned him, which later in life, he for a time he didn't understand, but she was really, imagine doing that, a mother doing that to her son. But she said, I don't know who he is, get away. And that's what my dad did. And he ran away. He didn't know the fate of all the people that were taken that day, but he ran. If you go to the next slide. In Europe at that time, people had identification cards. Now we have driver's licenses, when we're driving, somebody stops us. But in Europe at that time, we had ID cards. If you were Jewish, you had an ID card with a J, a red J stamped on it. If you were not Jewish, it didn't have that J. Excuse me. My dad, through the resistance, was able to obtain an ID card, and this is the copy of it. That's his picture. He took on a new name. His name was Menno Denneboom, but he is now Nicholas de Jong. You can see that. He has a new birth date. And if he was stopped on the street by a Nazi, he could produce this ID card and they would let him go on his way. If he had an ID card that had a J, they could take his bike, beat him up, take him away, whatever they pleased. So one of the ways that he could get through the streets was to have this false ID card. Seems like small piece of paper, but huge in a way to move through the city. You can see he has his address is on the Prinsengracht 1099, which is, some of you have read the story of Anne Frank. The address that's on this card was Prinsengracht. And there were people in the resistance who helped make this card and make it look authentic. So where was he to go? He didn't know where to go. I understand that he went to some 26 different addresses, knocking on the door, asking people to take him in. The resistance movement sent him to places, but people were afraid because if they were found to be hiding a Jewish person, they would meet the same fate as the Jewish person they were trying to save. So it was a very dangerous thing to do. So he might have stayed a few days in one home or another home, but every time people, sent him on his way, they didn't want to keep him. But finally, if you go to the next slide, excuse me. This is a picture taken back in 1998. That's me. It was a long time ago. This lady who's sitting here, her name is Ruli. And the lady behind her, that's her daughter. Her name is also Ruli. They named her the same. This was the lady. Her name was Ruli and her husband Hank. And at the time, their 5-year-old daughter took my dad in. They belonged to a church. There were only a handful of people in that church that decided that they were going to hide Jews. So Hank was an upholsterer, had a simple job. They lived in a simple apartment. They lived in the center of Amsterdam, and they took in my dad and another young man, and they hid him in a coal bin in the kitchen for 2 years. So now they were a family of 5, previously a family of 3. So they had to get more food. And I know that my dad did suffer hunger, and they all probably did, because now they had to, hide that they were getting more food for more people. He couldn't walk on the floor, make noise, and nobody in the building knew that this couple was hiding 2 people. You can't flush a toilet, you can't turn on a light, you can't pass by the window. Very scary time. Fortunately, they were never betrayed. You know the story of Anna Frank. You know she was hidden in the attic, and she was betrayed by someone, and they were all taken away, and we know how that ended. Fortunately, my dad's, this home was never betrayed. He was never betrayed by neighbors. Nobody knew, nobody found out. When I visited Ruli those many years ago, I said to her, why did you do that? Why did you risk the life of your one and only daughter, your little family? You didn't have to do this. You're such a hero to do this. And she was totally taken aback. And she was like, I'm not a hero. I was just doing the right thing. And I said to Ruli, what, younger Ruli, you were 5 years old. We know all about 5-year-old kids. They have a big mouth, they tell things. How is it that you never said anything to your friends, to anybody? And she just said that, my mother always told me if I said anything, something terrible was going to happen to us. And so she didn't. So she, as a young child, was a rescuer also. And they became very much a part of our family. The young Ruli just passed away a year ago, but I visited her every time I went to Holland. They were our family, because they were our family. They allowed us to be here today. If you go to the next slide, you see that when the war was over, my father found out the fate of his entire family. This is from a book saying what happened to family members. So number 13, you see Deneboom's spear, Johanna. She was 51. She died in Sobibor. Sobibor was a death camp in Poland. And this was in April 43. Remember, they were picked up in March of 43. So very soon after they were picked up. Number 14, Ezra Deneboom. That's my uncle. He was 18. He also died in Sobibor. Number 15, Isidore, my father's brother, 24, also died in Sobibor soon after he was picked up in March of 43. And Isaac Deneboom, number 16, he was 52. My grandfather, you can see it says he was the director of the Rudoltheim Stiftung, and he was married to Johanna Spear. So this book lays out all the children, all the workers, everybody perished in that home. So now my father found out the fate of his family, and he is the only one left in his entire family. If you go to the next slide, oh, is it straight for you? No. Sorry. if you can see what this slide is. 2 years ago, I was in Holland with my sister, and there was a dedication of a monument put across the street from where the home was in Hilversum. The home doesn't exist anymore. It was bombed at the end of the war, but this monument was placed here so the people of Hilversum would know what happened on this spot. This is a picture of a young boy and a young girl. They're clutching each other. They're holding a little teddy bear. You can't really see here, but and this is so the people, and this was only done 2 years ago, but it's for the people in the neighborhood and the children in the neighborhood to understand what happened right where they live not so long ago. And so it's a beautiful, very emotional monument that was placed there. If you go to the next slide. So after the war, this is me. That's the little baby in the stewardess in the flight attendant's arms. I was born in the Netherlands, and I was born on the Prinsengracht. Again, the street where Anna Frank was born, just a few houses down. That's where we lived in Holland. But here we're immigrating to Canada. We're refugees. We're leaving Europe. My parents were afraid that what happened then might happen again. There was rumblings. There were, when the war was over, the anti-Semitism didn't end on that day, and they were scared, and they were able to find refuge by immigrating to Canada. And here we are. My dad didn't speak English. My mother didn't speak English. They didn't have a job. They didn't have any money. My father had no family, and we were going to make a new life in a new land. And here we are, my brother, my sister, and myself. I'm the youngest of 3 children. If you go to the next slide, this is my parents in the later years. They've both passed away now, but they were extremely grateful for their new life. My father did not speak much about his past. He was just so happy to get a job, to raise a family again, to start a new life. My mother spoke more about it, but they were extremely sweet and grateful people that they survived, and to start a new life, to have a family. And if you go to the next picture, you can see what happens when you save one life, 2 lives. This was a reunion I had in my house here in Vermont a couple of years ago. My parents would have had 19 great-grandchildren now. My brother, my sister, their family. This is what happens when 2 people are saved. But imagine how many books were not written, inventions didn't happen, music not enjoyed. All these people and all these children will now grow up and be productive members of society. But this is what happens. Think of all those lives that were cut that are not happening because they were not rescued, saved, because of the hatred that was going on in Europe at that time. If you go to the next slide. So we know that in Europe at that time, there were 9 million Jews before the war. 6 million of them were murdered. So 2/3 of them were murdered. And of the 6 million Jews who were murdered, 1.5 million were children. Now, why do you think that the Nazis would target children? They didn't do anything wrong. They were innocent, they were small. But what happens to children? They grow up. And the Nazis had hoped to exterminate all the Jews of Europe. And so that is why they targeted the children. And we know that in the Netherlands, in Holland, before the war, there were 140,000 Jewish people. And of that, 107,000 were murdered. Remember, I showed you that picture of the beginning of my mother's family, the 5 of them, and I told you that they all survived. In Zutphen, where they were from, there were 400 Jewish people in that village before the war. 20 survived, of which my family was 5. So they almost were successful in eliminating all the Jews of that village. Let's go to the next slide. The Jews were targeted in Europe, and that was the main focus of the Nazis. But sure enough, they were after many other people who did not fit the you know, superior race that Hitler was espousing. They went after Polish people, people with mental and physical disabilities, gypsies or Romas, they were called, people who were homosexual, communists, criminals, homeless. You can see from this, and these symbols that you see here, as the yellow star you recognize, and maybe the red triangle, when people were imprisoned in concentration camps, they were given a symbol to put on their clothing to identify why they were being imprisoned, what category they belonged to. So it wasn't just the Jews that were targeted, it was many, many other groups. And of course, we know that the Jews were the main focus of who they wanted to eliminate, but Jehovah Witnesses, plenty other groups. If you go to the next slide, I want you to just think about what happened and who you are in this triangle. I find it easier to understand. The victims we know in this scenario were the Jews, physically and mentally handicapped, the Roma, the political dissidents. There were many groups, Jehovah Witnesses, the victims. And in our world, it's the people who are being bullied, the people who are being singled out for whatever reason, the color of their skin, the way they speak, their religion. These are the victims. We don't want to be that victim, but we don't want to be that perpetrator either. The perpetrators are those people who are inflicting the hatred against these groups. We're not going to be those people. But are we the bystanders? Are we that person who says, you know what? They're not coming after me. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm just going to turn the other way. It doesn't affect me. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to close my eyes. Or are we going to be that rescuer or that upstander, as Ruli was to my father and all the people that hid my mother's entire family? Are we going to say, that is not right? It can't happen. You know, in your school and in your community, there are people who are being singled out for no reason. They didn't do anything bad. They're not bad people. But for whatever reason, they are singled out. And you have to say, I'm not going to be that perpetrator. I'm not going to be that bystander. I'm going to be that person who's going to embrace that person, call them up. You can't visit them right now, but you can call them. You can listen to what they're saying, sympathize with them, help them. You know, there's kids that need help with homework or things that happen in your school, and you know who I'm talking about. This is your job, because that's the only way that we are ever going to make sure that this atrocity would never, ever happen again. And we can see it in our society today very, very clearly. So if we think that it happened so far away, such a long time ago, we have to be so careful and vigilant that something like this can't happen right here in our own backyard, because we see things in our town, in our cities, in our state, in our country, in our world. So it's very, very important to understand what happened during the Holocaust and step up and help people, understand people, know that people are different than you, but are not bad. Listen, we all have a choice to be good or to be bad, and we're going to choose to be good people. And that's my point today, and I open up to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. Miriam, do you want to just quickly talk about, before we open up to questions, the Vermont Holocaust Memorial?
Sure. So we, as I said, we opened a few years ago. It's a virtual. We don't have a physical building, but we go to schools like yours. We go to libraries. We speak to you know special interest groups about our stories. We also provide educational material for teachers. We have workshops for teachers so that they could learn how to teach about the Holocaust. We have resource material. And we also have something that maybe your teachers want to get involved in. It's called the Leaf Project. And I don't know if you've told the kids about it, but we're trying to gather enough kids to, well, your teachers will tell you about the Leaf Project. Is that fair, or do you want me to?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So we're when we think about 1.5 million children, just to visualize that number is just beyond comprehension. It's like, I mean, we have 600,000 people in the state of Vermont. So, I mean, just think about how big that number is. And we thought to use the example of a tree, a leaf, um, because of our landscape here in Vermont. We're just so populated with trees that we see that a tree is a symbol of life. A tree has roots. A tree has branches, like your family has branches. Each leaf could represent a family member. If you cut down that tree, if those leaves die, then life is over, right? It's so essential. And trees don't live by themselves. They live in a community, in a forest, like families do, like people do. And so we started something called the Leaf Project. And we want people, not only children, but all people to, if they wish to participate, to make a leaf. It could be something you draw, something you trace, something you find on the internet, color it, write a message on it, and send it to us. And we're trying to collect 1.5 million leaves. This is going to take us forever, but that's the whole idea. And we hope to one day make an artist installation of some kind to try to visualize that each leaf represents a life, and to understand the magnitude of the number. We thought at first to try to collect 6 million, but we won't ever see that because it's such an enormous number. And so but we have to think that each leaf, as in each life, is a person with a dream, with a vision, with a talent. And each is important. We talk about big numbers, but it's really 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. And that's the importance of that project. And we hope that you'll participate and you'll make us a leaf and send it in and we'll add it to our other leaves.
Thank you so much. And
You're
I think we
welcome.
are definitely going to be doing that project.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just stop the recording. And I think I'm also going to stop